Okay, so today we're going to look at user management, which includes making the users and controlling what they can do, what groups they go into. So as user management, we're going to talk about users themselves and groups. And when we're doing this, we're talking about local users on the local computer. We talked about the network models, and network models were workgroup and domain. The real difference, according to me, and there are some others obviously, but one of the big differences between those two models is where are the credentials for the users? When you log on, where is the user? The local user is on the local computer and only gets access to resources on the local computer. Can only be given access to resources on the local computer. In the domain model, like you're in here, when you log on to the domain, which resources do you get access to? Those that you've been given in the domain. Because the printer that you use is certainly not attached to your computer, is it?
No.
Your home directory is not attached to your computer. No. Some of the other stuff, if you use the Students Apps folder, it's not attached to your computer, so you get access to those resources. If you were to log on to the local machine, or when you log on to your virtual machine, do you have a printer? Not yet, because you haven't installed one, the local resource. Do you have your home directory? No, because you're not logged on to it. Do you have the student apps? Not, because you're not logged on to it. So when we're talking about these users, and we will talk about groups, a couple of different ways to make them and manage them, we're talking about those on the local computer, local users and local groups. So the objectives: create local user accounts and groups. Not a really big deal, is it? I mean, probably everybody has done this, where you go into the control panel and user accounts and make a user account. Or use the command line with the, which command? Net user. You read the chapter. Have you done it with a net user?
I actually did it beforehand.
Yeah, and you can. The advantage of command line commands are they can be scripted. There are, when we get into the domain, there are other tools that we can use to make users in bulk rather than just the net user command. Or we can use the GUI in the local computers in the computer management in the local users and groups, MMC Snap-in. So local user accounts and groups, describe them. We kind of have done that, right? They're on the local machine, and that's where they get access. That's where you can give access. If we use NTFS based on the last week's the NTFS permissions, and you had kids or other users on your computer that you didn't want to get into certain areas, make them a user, or when we get into parental controls a little bit later in this chapter, you make them a user. You control that user object separately from everything else. You give that user or your user specific access to files, or you take away access to those others for files. And if we use the implicit deny, if you give your user access to a resource and you have a child on that machine, do they get access to the resource? This is a 50-50, 90. What do you think, yes or no? No, because the implicit deny says if I give it to you and don't give it to them, then they don't get it because you've got it. Now, explicit deny is when you check the no access checkbox, and that one really is dangerous. Create and manage user accounts, another of the objectives. Manage profiles. This is something that to me, kind of important, kind of not important, because when we get into policies in the server, policies can do this for you without all of the flailing around, but Microsoft still thinks it's important. A profile is basically what your desktop looks like, what your background is, what's in the different folders, because you have a whole bunch of different folders there in your profile, right? If you go into to computer, and then under your name you got documents and my web pages and my videos and my pictures and all that stuff. That goes in the profile. And when you think about profiles, think about that if they get corrupted or deleted, all that stuff that is there is history. One of the other things that goes into a profile is if you use Outlook as your email client, by default, all of your emails that are saved locally go into your profile. When you encrypt files, the encryption certificates go into your profile. So it's kind of a big deal being able to manage it, knowing what's there and what you may not want to be there. Because if you have multiple users, and I used to do this at home, we had multiple users on the machine that shared the same email account. If it were in my wife's profile and I logged on, I couldn't read any of the emails because I didn't have permission. So you have to move that stuff out into an area where everybody has permission to do what they need to do their job. Windows 7 integration with networks, describe it, you experience it every day. When you log on, use the resources on the network. And then configure and use parental controls. For those of you who have youngsters that are growing up, this can become an issue. When mine was young, we didn't have any of that parental control business, time of day and all that. So I had to figure out some other way to do it. I got mine with a proxy server. I used to hate it. Because kids will stay online once they get, in junior high, middle school. They'll stay online all day and all night. Right, Everett? So I used to have proxy, and this was when AOL Instant Messenger was the thing, and they would stay up all night messaging. So I had to figure out how to kill the process and then not allow him to reconnect. So I used a proxy server. You can use parental controls with a lot of this. Parental controls can also control what type of networks you go to. The thing that I would caution you about is I had a guy probably a year and a half ago that got himself a brand new computer, put parental controls on for his kids, and everybody was using the same account. And one of the options in there is that you deny all of the websites that don't have ratings, and the ratings are a voluntary thing. Well, all of a sudden he can't get to his virtual machine. And, of course, it's our fault that he can't get to the virtual machine on that computer, but he can get to it on every other computer in the world. And I think it's because he put the parental controls on and denied the ones that don't have a rating because it doesn't have a rating. So he locked himself out. If you do that, and this is my recommendation, is you have a separate account for you and a separate account for the users, usually children, that you want to control the access, what times they can use it with. So the user accounts, and now that we've done this, let's go through the rest of the slides. Got to have one to log on, do you not? You ever try to get on a Windows 2000, Windows NT machine without a user account? Yeah. Can you do it? Safe mode. Without a user account, you still got in safe mode even, you still got to log on, right? Yeah. Well, as a somebody. So we need a user account, and the user accounts are the way that we manage access to resources. As attributes described in the user control access, what can we do? We talked about permissions, and we assign permissions. Typically, we're going to assign permissions to groups, and then we're going to put users in groups, because once you get past the single machine stage, or maybe even at the single machine stage, you're probably going to have more than one or two users you want to give access to that resource. For instance, students in the Students Apps folder. If we went in and individually added each user to that folder, it'd be a real pain. So what we do is create a group, give the group access to the resource, and then put the students in the group. And by the way, you can script that add and take away from the groups also. So you can do it relatively quickly. Scripting is a good thing. You'll get a course in that later. Local user accounts created in Windows 7 exist only on the local computer. Hopefully, got that in the startup. Where are they stored? They're stored in an area called the Security Accounts Manager, which is a hidden portion of the registry. Can this be modified? Sure, because you ever gone through using either one of the Linux tools or one of the Windows tools to where you boot to a piece of removable media and reset the password? Anybody ever done that? Had to do that? So that means that even though it's hidden, we can actually manipulate it if Windows isn't running. One of the things to remember about modifying files in Windows is you have a hard time changing things that are open unless it's with the application that has it open. So it can be modified. If you're an administrator, there are tools that once you get onto the system, you can actually dump the SAM to a text file and look and see what's in it. And you can take the hash, and we'll talk about hash here in a second, the hash, which is just a bunch of gibberish out, and try to crack it, hack it. When the user accounts are created, they're assigned a SID, a security identifier. When a user account gets access to resources, the SID is used, the number, not the username. What that means is then that if we need to rename an account, you can rename it and it still has access to all the same resources. So that if we had like a Jay Geis who was the campus director of academic affairs, and he got access to a whole bunch of resources that the campus director of academic affairs needed, and all of a sudden he gets promoted to campus president, and somebody else comes in, and we don't know who that is yet, to be the campus director of academic affairs. We can simply rename his account, reset the password, and that new user has a new username and gets access to all the resources that he had because you used the SID and not the username. One of the downsides of SID, security-wise, is that the user administrator the SID always ends in 500. The user account guest always ends in SID 501. I used to say I had SID 500, but it's a really long number. Ends in 500, so that regardless of what you name the user account administrator to, the SID's always going to end in 500. People can find that if they can get access to the system. The logon methods, configurations, standalone configurations, whether it's a standalone, a workgroup member, or a domain client. Standalone means that it is the only machine that's there. Workgroup member means that it has an administrative association. And when you installed your machines, they're members of a work group. Actually, I don't know that you can actually install one without being a member of some work group, even if it's the only member of the work group. The default work group name is work group. So when we do that, what they're trying to distinguish here is if you're a work group member, the administrative sharing, if you make a user with the same username and password on another computer in the work group, then you can access the resources on that work group. That username has the authority to, without actually having to go through the whole logon process. A domain client, like these machines, you log on to the domain, get access to the domain resources and whatever the policies allow you to do locally. The logon methods is the Windows welcome screen, which is where you guys are now, right? The Windows welcome screen shows the stuff. Click on a user and log on as a user. You notice that the user administrator doesn't show up there. It is disabled by default. It's there. It's disabled by default. So it's there. Authenticates users by using the SAM database, the Security Accounts Manager database, the hidden portion of the registry. Secure logon, you can go into it, and one of the activities is going to have you configure it to do a Control-Alt-Delete logon. When you do a Control-Alt-Delete in the virtual machines, what are the Control-Alt-Delete keys? Just as a Right-Alt-Delete for Windows. It's different for VMware. I think it's Control-Alt-Insert for VMware. But the Right-Alt key, and I don't mean to be insulting, but the Right-Alt is the Alt key on the right-hand side of the keyboard. Same one that you have to use if your mouse gets stuck in one of these things. They shouldn't now because I think everybody has all of that on. What the Control-Alt-Delete does when it is pressed is give you some security, and they talk about this in the book, in that it only communicates with the operating system. It doesn't communicate with the applications, which means that if you have something running on your machine trying to steal your password, it's not sending it there. It's only sending it to the operating system. So you get some security with the Control-Alt-Delete. The other method to secure logon, spyware, is in a domain client. Yeah, if you are a domain client like these machines are, that's the only way you can log on with the Control-Alt-Delete. So we can configure it with a work group or standalone machine as either the Windows Welcome, the Secure Logon, or no credentials. Does anybody other than me use that? They have an activity. I use it at home. Who can get to my machine? I guess if somebody breaks in, they could get there, but hopefully only the people that are supposed to be there. It just simplifies things because I have it start up in the morning. It starts up and runs a bunch of things. You don't have to wait to do the log on and open the email. Have it start up with the BIOS, automatic log on, and then start the email client so that when you get up and go look at the email, it's already been downloaded. You don't have to wait for Outlook to go through its machinations to get there. Fast user switching. An advantage of 7 over XP is, as a domain client, we have fast user switching. When we had the XP machines, if one of you walked away and left a machine locked in the library, how did we then allow somebody else to use that computer? Because they'll lock themselves after a certain amount of time, right? We used to crash them. At least that's what I did. Hold down the power button, turn it off. Now, if that happens, you can just log on as another user. And the example that they give is somebody's using the machine, go to lunch, somebody else wants to check their email during lunch. Once it's locked, you can log on as another user, the fast user switching, which is an advantage over those things. The logon methods, and this is just when we get into the user accounts, users, and then the advanced. Require users to press Control-Alt-Delete down here for the secure logon, advanced management, and then they have an activity. Users here, there's a checkbox that says that everybody's got to use a password. If you uncheck that, it'll ask you which user you want to log on automatically, and then when you start the computer, it won't ask you to log on. It'll just automatically log on as that user. Sometimes desirables configured the users tab of the user account applet. When you start trying to do this and you go to the account, and I thought that the wording in the activity was really confusing. There is a NetWizPL or NetPLWiz that does tell you where to go to actually open the advanced user window in order to be able to do this. Because you can poke around in that. It says go to the advanced. Well, I poked around in that. And on my machine at home, at least, I didn't do that. I had already configured it to do this at home. So, James, holding down the Shift key during the boot process stops the automatic log-on from occurring if you need to do that. If you need to log on as the user administrator for some reason, that account doesn't show up, is not used except in safe mode, which means that physical access can be a big deal. And you know what the default password is for administrator? It's a blank. You know what the default password is for guest? It's a blank.
I thought admin was admin.
So admin was admin. We don't have an admin. You're talking about routers.
Okay, sorry.
Depends on the manufacturer.
Yeah,
some of them are blank.
Pass.
All of them are different. Cisco. They're all different. But in Windows, the default password for the administrator is blank. So what's one of the first things that you should do with this disabled administrator account? Set a password on it that you know and that you remember. You should also do the same thing with the guest account. Then you can disable them again.
Is there a way to keep user accounts accounts active but keep them off the list in Windows 7?
You're talking about on the you mean keep them off the list?
When you go to secure login, it will show you the list of the user accounts at that computer.
Not secure login. Secure login says put in your username.
Okay.
The Windows Welcome lists them,
Yeah.
but secure login,
Is there
you shouldn't get one.
Windows Welcome?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is.
All right.
If you really want that kind of security, go to secure login, because it's not a big deal, and it gives you the security if somebody has gotten into the system, has infected the system, that it's not going to send a password back. So. But in those, and this is the users must enter a username and password. If you uncheck that, in this user accounts tab of the advanced user accounts applet, that's a mouthful, then it'll ask you which user you want to use for the logon. And when you start the machine, it goes right past the login screen in order to do that. Naming conventions, we could probably spend some time talking about that. What I want to say about naming conventions is have one. What are you going to do? On your local computer, is it a big deal? Probably not. When you're working in a larger scale in a domain doing this stuff, is it a big deal? Probably so. Being able to find the users quickly. Being able to make the users. And then you have to have some sort of accommodation. What if that username already exists? Because in a domain, you can only have one of a username. You can only have one L cold iron because it's not really hierarchical. It's really a flat database that appears hierarchical. If it were truly hierarchical, I could have an lcoldiron.faculty.roanoke.ecpivab.edu. It's a really long name, but it's there. And then I could have an lcoldiron.students. all of that other stuff. But since it's not really hierarchical, you can only have one user with that username in your domain. Which means that if you have a lot of John Smiths, you're going to have something else to do that. The one that they're using now here, the first three of your first name, the first three of your last name, and a random number, has worked very well. Been very few duplicates, and I think it actually being generated there haven't been any duplicates. The thing that happens is if somebody starts, we had a student that started at Virginia Beach, got some online courses, and then came here, and they made him a new user here, and then when he tried to log on to Moodle, he couldn't do it. Because the way the Moodle logon works is it starts at the top of the root at Virginia Beach and works its way down to the first user account that it finds. Found the online account first, which was disabled, and he couldn't log on. He could log on to the local computer, but he couldn't log on to the Moodle machine. Naming conventions. Logon names got to be unique, particularly on the machines, but in a domain also. Less than 20 characters, but most people don't want a logon name that big anyway, do you? Because you got to type it every time you log in. The logon names are not case-sensitive. Passwords are. People say, "Oh, I didn't capitalize the A in administrator." It doesn't really care about usernames, but it does care about passwords for case-sensitive. The default user accounts, administrator. We kind of got that guy, all powerful on the machine. Characteristics not visible on the logon screen. Has a blank password by default. Cannot be deleted. It can be disabled. Can't be locked out due to incorrect logon attempts. Can't be removed from the local administrators group. The can't be locked out is, to me, kind of a big deal because you take the most powerful user on the machine or in the domain, and we already know what his name is, right? We may rename it, but then we got to look for SID 500, and then we can find that guy. And we can try as many passwords as we want without locking up the account. And what that's talking about, incorrect logon or cannot be locked out due to incorrect logon attempts. We can configure, and they're going to have you configure a policy so that you say, hey, if you try to log on 3 times, 5 times, 6 times, a dozen times, and you do the password wrong, it locks the user account, and you can determine how many bad logon attempts and how long it gets locked for. The default is nothing gets locked out. Your accounts here will get locked out if you, I think it's 10, because when we got our non-technical students, they weren't real good at remembering their passwords. It only locks you out for like 5 minutes, so by the time that you can do anything, it's going to be re-enabled. By the time you can get over to Chris and have him reset the password, it's already going to have reset itself. You can determine that on the local machine. You can determine that in the domain. The policies are going to be the same. Can be disabled and can be renamed, and it's disabled by default in Windows 7. When you log on to Windows 7, and they'll get to this, but while I'm thinking about it, you get two tokens, one for the non-administrative user and one for the administrative user. When you're using the resources running Windows or running Word or whatever else, you're running it as the regular user. When you try to do something that requires administrative authority, depending on how you have the user account control configured, it tries to activate that administrative token. And it may be that you just simply say, okay, but in here, when you try to do something, it pops up and wants some credentials, right? So if somebody with local administrative authority puts their credentials in, it'll go on. So that's the way it controls those things. That's the way it keeps the administrator's account disabled, but you should set a password on it. Guest, least privilege, extremely limited access to computer activities. The guest is kind of something that most people really don't need, but what it really is you know what an expert is, right? Somebody comes from out of town with a briefcase. This is when you get one of those experts who want to come in and check their email or whatever. You can give them a guest account access. They can't do a whole lot on the network, but they can do those things. It, again, cannot be deleted, cannot be locked out. Is disabled by default, has a blank password, can be renamed, is a member of the guest group by default, and is a member of the everyone group. The everyone group is like everyone. The everyone group doesn't have as much authority as it used to. The initial account, different from the administrator, visible to the logon screen, does have a blank password, can be deleted, can be locked out, can be removed from the administrator's group. So when you initially started up your machine, it had you make a user, right? That user has administrative authority. The first user by default has administrative authority. You can change that if you want, but you need to have some account on the machine that has that privilege. Told you the story about the student years ago, and this was in probably a Windows 2000 machine, maybe a 2003 machine. In the server class, did a lab where the lab said was make a new user that has administrative authority and then disable the administrator's account. Well, she skipped the part about make the new user with administrator authority and disable the administrator's account. And you get a pop-up that says, in my words, you're about to do something really stupid. Do you want to do it? She clicked yes. Watch out for clickies. Now you have a computer that has a server that has no accounts that are active. Because on a server machine, the first two accounts are administrator and guest, is like every other Windows machine in the world. The guest account by default is disabled. In this case, the administrator account wasn't because you didn't go through the process like you do now to make a user that you can log on as.
There's a way to restore the admin, isn't there?
Yeah, you log on, you boot to safe mode.
Yeah.
As long as you know what the password is. And she told us the wrong password, so it was a lot of fun.
You can force reset the password as well.
Maybe. The answer is maybe. Force reset if you've taken all the precautions. You can force reset the password in a Windows 7 machine as long as you have a password reset disk, which can be on a floppy or on a USB drive. But you have to have something that enables that. Becomes a little bit more complex when you start doing this stuff in Active Directory. Now, it didn't have Active Directory on it. It was a local user. So, yeah, you can reset those things. number of tools that allow you to reset passwords.
I remember having to get to one of my old girlfriend's computers. She did the same thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of them for desktops in particular. You can reset local passwords. Because where's the password stored? Or do I have to start over? Where's the password stored? So I got to start over. Where's the password stored on a local computer? Okay, we'll go back and start over.
It's stored in the, where's the password stored?
Uh-huh. Where are the passwords stored on your local computer?
I want to see BIOS.
BIOS? Now, BIOS is before. You can't have a BIOS password.
That's Security Accounts Manager.
Security Accounts Manager, the SAM, which is a hidden portion of the registry.
Go Everett. Everybody clap for him. Everybody clap.
See, because we don't have to start over now.
The brain on Everett. I need to move him back.
Why is that significant that you know where the accounts are stored? So you know what to protect, for one thing, is there. And back to the thing Kim was saying, can you reset them? Yes. There's a lot of utilities that will reset them for you. Generally, they tend to be Linux disks. Microsoft's got one that allows, it's got one called application called Locksmith in it that you can reset the local passwords with. And yeah, do people lock themselves out? Yes. What's another way to do that, which we haven't talked about yet? What if you didn't know the password and you had a restore point, and you restored it to before, since the restore point basically is your registry configurations, and you restored it before you reset the password? Then you should get your old password back. That's one of the ones, if you go to the internet, how to reset my password. If it's a Windows 7 machine, actually they say Vista on, that's one of the things that they recommend, is just go back to a restore point before you change the password. So groups, we have some default groups in these things, and I got an activity in the labs for you to look at what these things actually do. But the reason that groups work is when you give access to a group and then put users in a group, they inherit all the permissions of that group. So if you're going to control a large number of users, groups are the way to do that. Built-in groups, long list, this is just part of it. Administrators, backup, cryptographic, distributed COM, event sig, we keep going on and on and on and on and on. The ones that we're concerned about, this administrators group allows whoever you put into it to be all-powerful on the machine. They can do anything. The users, the group users, are where most of our users are going to go, allow you to use the computer, to use the applications on the computer itself. Remote desktop users can be significant. You got to be in this group before you can actually connect to a machine via remote desktop. Administrators are in that by default. This is just which is in the activities, a step-by-step how you do creating users. A couple of ways to do it: the control panel, local users and groups, the advanced user accounts applet, which has got its own command line command in order to get there quickly and open it. From the administrator account, from the administrators group, all users derive their authority from the groups that they're a member of. Most actions triggered by administrator account do not result in a prompt from the user account control. That's what everybody loved to hate about Vista. And every time you try to do anything, you get this pop-up, do you really want to do this? Windows 7 tempered that quite a bit so that you don't get the pop-up as much. But if something's trying to make a change to the disk, you get the pop-up. The reason is it's trying to make a change to the disk. Did you start it? If you did, just say yes and go on, depending on how you have user account control configured. And you can turn it off if you don't like it. I think it's dangerous because if you get a virus, then it won't even ask you. It'll just go ahead and install the virus on the machine. That's what it's really designed to prevent. Basic administration of their accounts. The users can make some changes there, like change your the picture that's there, reset your password. Those sorts of things can be done from the Accounts app. But the local users and groups snap in. You can create user accounts and groups here, and you can add users to the groups in this area. You can do, when you put users in groups, you can do one of two things. You can add users to the groups, or you can add groups to the users. When you look at the tabs of member of, you can add it either way. You can delete a user, rename a user, set up a user password. The delete a user, unless that user is going away permanently, is not necessarily the recommended method to take care of this, because when you delete a user, remember that SID, the security ID, is what all the permissions are based on. That SID goes away. So if you ever wanted to not have to go back and recreate those permissions, what you probably want to do is disable the account, and then when whoever's going to take over that position comes in, rename it to their new username. Because the username is really only significant to us. What's significant to the system is the SID itself. You can set passwords, reset passwords here. Disadvantage to reset passwords is that you made all those encrypted files and you right-click and reset the password. Your encryption is now encrypted, but you can't decrypt it anymore because your certificate is no longer valid for those systems.
That's just by resetting the password?
Just by resetting the password, by the right-click reset. If you reset it yourself, if you change the password, it's not a problem. If it gets reset, then you can have some, in the local ones, you can have some issues. That's why, and the next chapter we'll talk about security, go through the process to export the certificate. Once you encrypt something, do that. Not a big deal, really small files, put it on a flash drive, put it someplace, so that if something happens to the certificate, something happens to the account, profile gets deleted, certificate goes away, you can always import it and you get back the access to the files that you've encrypted. Member of tab lists the groups, and they'll go through those activities. Member of, and you can add. In this case, member of tab will be on the user. You can add groups there. When you go to the group, it's going to have a tab that says members. You can add users at that location. Profile tab, probably not a big deal unless you don't want to put it at the default C:, and Windows 7 C:, users, %username, %, a variable that represents whatever your logon, whatever your username is. Are you going to put them someplace else on a local machine? Probably not. The answer is maybe. Are you going to put them someplace else in a domain? The answer to that is maybe. If you want roaming profiles, then you're going to store it centrally so that regardless of where you are, you can download that profile. Again, a profile is basically what your desktop looks like, the things that are in there. Well, there are lots of stuff in there because you have your documents, your downloads, and all that other good stuff. Profiles get huge. If you'll take a look at it, they get really big over time. If you want to change the storage location, and this is just the disk location of the profile, you can do that. You can put it in a different location. The logon script box, a script that's run each time during the logon. We use logons in the domain here because when you get a map H drive to your home directory, I think, right? When you get those maps, that's a script that runs every time. If the server is particularly slow and you're particularly fast, if you open it up, double-click and open up the Windows Explorer, sometimes you can see it, all of them go away and see all of them come back because the first thing the script does is delete all the current mapping so that you wouldn't keep mine and I wouldn't keep yours when we go in there, and then it remaps what you have access to. Home folder defines the default location for saving files. Issue here is in a domain, when you go to Microsoft Office, which is what we use, where is the default save location for Microsoft Office? If you don't say anything, where's it going to save it? My documents. Where are my documents? And we get our non-technical brethren that sitting up here where Tyler is and write half of their term paper and just save it. And they go in the library and, where's my term paper? It's only on my computer. You can, in a domain, you can redirect that to the home directories if you want. So you can change those things. That's why you might want to change. One of the reasons you might want to change the location of the profile, because a lot of things are there. Here we go, netpl.wiz. This is the NetPL wizard to start the advanced users account, only available from the command line, so that you can do all of those clever things like tell I don't want a password anymore, but log on with this user every time. So that one is there. That's, by the way, that's in the activities. When you do that activity, that command is there, is in the command. When we get there, users must enter a password, uncheck it. When you continue to say, okay, which user do you want to use to log on to the system every time? You can reset a password here. You can add users for this computer, and then there is an advanced tab over there. Profiles, collection of desktop and environment part I forgot, but again, the profile basically what the desktop looks like. Each user's got a different one. C:\user used to be C:\documents and settings. I just changed the location where we put these things. The folders that are there, the ones that probably are kind of useful, or maybe downloads, the ones that are useful to me, at least, because my wife gets really confused if she doesn't have her favorites. As we change anything, we've got to move that favorites folder. It's going to be all your Internet Explorer links. The desktop, what your desktop looks like, all the shortcuts that are on your desktop, any files that are on the desktop, all that's going to be in that folder. So if you want to move a profile and you only want to move part of it, you can go to that particular folder and copy and paste it from one location to the other. It's kind of handy when they move machines up here, for instance, for financial aid. They've got certain shortcuts to go for financial aid in Internet Explorer. Rather than going back and try to refine those things, we can just copy the favorites from one to the other. You can do those, and you can have a lot. These go on, the profiles go on and on and on. Where are the registry settings? Because that's what really is here. It's in the ntuser.dat file, which is a hidden file, but it's there. If you go into the view in the what you want to see in the folder options, you can show the hidden system files, and then ntuser.dat and a bunch of others will show up here. So this is one that stores the information that's used in showing your desktop when we do these things. If we wanted to make it a mandatory profile so that it always looked the same, and that would actually be on a local machine, what we would do in the domain is just create a policy. You have to rename that ntuser.dat to ntuser.man, which will make it a mandatory profile. The default profile, the first one, I got a couple of activities to change the default profile. This is the one that's used to make the users, the profile that's used. So it's actually copied into the new user. Anything that you want the new user to have, you need to modify this profile so that it has that. With using sysprep and without, the mandatory profile, again, what this does is you can make changes to the system, but when you log out, shut down the system, the changes aren't saved back. When are changes actually made to profiles? When are changes actually made to profiles? When you actually shut down the machine, because that's when it's saved back. Roaming profile just means that we're stored at a central location, like on a server. So you can. What that means is that wherever you go, you're going to get the same profile. To me, the problem with that, and networks have gotten faster, the problem with that is they get really big. And they can take some time to download, because every time you log onto a machine, you get the profile downloaded, the roaming profile downloaded.
That's why I give you that long wait time preparing desktop.
Now, preparing desktop here, the first time you log on, it's got to create all that structure in your local profile. And the next time it's a little faster, right? If you had a roaming profile, you get that wait every time while it downloaded the files, depending on how big the profile is, obviously. But it can be useful, and this is one I alluded to, that you may want to put it someplace so that it stores your emails at some other location, those kinds of things. The public profile, if you want something to show up on all of the machines, there is a public profile. So in CCOLN users, there's a public profile and a default profile. The default profile is used to make the new users. The public profile shows up on all of the users' desktops. Public music, the start menu, show folders and shortcuts. You've done that. Personal version of the start menu stored in their profile. Windows Explorer accesses and modifies the contents of it. Nothing really magic there. Logon authorization, network types, peer-to-peer, and domain-based networks. Domain-based, mandatory secure login, mandatory secure Control-Alt-Delete. Once you join a machine to the domain, you don't have any of the other options. Peer-to-peer, network, computer-to-computer. This is one that if you want users to be able to have access to multiple machines without having to log on every time, make the same username and password to all of the computers. The Windows 7 limit for connections is 20. Before that, it's been 10 historically that you could have connected to it. Each computer has its own list of users in the SAM database, the Security Accounts Manager, the hidden portion of the registry, and here's the Windows 7 20 connection limit. Peer-to-peer, the SAM is used to access the users in each of those. Pass-through authentication is what I was talking about here. The simplest authentication, remote computer has a user account with the exact same name and password. You get pass-through authentication. It sees that as the same user, but they do have to do that. That's something that probably would be useful at home, although home network has become very handy in order to be able to share resources there. Domain-based, everybody's got a unique username and password, Control-Alt-Delete. Authentication is through the domain controller. And in those we have the Active Directory connectivity there. You have to join to be part of the domain. And when you join the domain admins group from the domain are automatically added to the local administrators group of the local machine, and that's how the domain administrators get administrative authority to the local computers. Cache credentials. I want to take a break. Cached credentials is something that allows computers that are members of the domain to log on if there is no domain controller available. Where this would come in handy is if you had laptops that are members of the domain and people took them on business trips with them. They would have the cache credentials. They could use their network credentials in order to log on to the machine. That way you don't have to explain to your non-technical brethren that when you're not here you got to use this username, and when you are here you use this one. So they can keep using the same username and password in order to get there. Huh? Your non-technical brethren, you know. Your day will come when you get to deal with them, trust me. After the credentials are cached locally, you can log on to the computer using the domain credentials even if the domain controller is not available. You can configure policies for cache credentials. I think it's on by default, and you determine how many users. I think 10 or 20 by default is what it automatically caches. You can limit that, and you can limit the number of logons that go into this. Parental controls specific user accounts, not administrative accounts, but regular users in this one. Must be standard user accounts in order to do this. Perform with the parental controls. You can configure time limits, control game playing, internet game playing, and these are the ones that actually have rankings on them. And you can allow or block programs, and there's another way that we're going to get to in a little bit to block programs or to allow programs. Time limits, restrict the logons to certain times of the day. Can vary for each day, so you have lots of flexibility in when the users can log on. And again, this is principally for parents that have children that do this thing. But based on all of the new results, it's not going to do us any good, right? Because most of you youngsters access the internet on your phones.
Yep.
So you got to go get an app for that in order to do that. You can do the same sorts of things, just not with this, because this is a Microsoft specific thing.
You can restrict data usage.
Can restrict.
Parental controls, you can limit how much data.
Yeah, you can. There's lots of controls in this thing. The downloads, whatever you want to control. And the game controls are not not local game controls, but these are controls. You can block games based on the game rating in these things, and well, you can block them based on the game rating. The game has to have a rating in order for that to happen. Additional categories, and you can get some of this. I'll go back to OpenDNS if you want to use it as a more general control. A number of these categories are in OpenDNS if you use that for your DNS lookups instead of what your ISP provides for you. Block programs, by default, everybody can run everything. You can restrict users to running only approved applications, and this can be on an individual user basis. And this, again, is in parental controls, user controls. Parental controls are not available in the Pro version, I believe. It's available in all of the home versions and in the Enterprise and the Everything version. Well, I'm not sure about, because the Pro version was designed for business, and they figured that you would be putting them in a domain, and you would restrict it with the domain. So where are the local user account credentials stored? Huh? Credentials. Passwords are stored in SAM. Thank you. The Security Accounts Manager, which is part of the registry. The reason I say it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, the registry is Windows' strength and Windows' weakness, because it leaves you a central point to manage, but it also leaves you a central point to attack. There's just so much in the registry. Fast user switching and a change in fast user switching, it is now available in the domain. It wasn't available in XP in the domain. The default accounts are based on the installation, the administrator, guest, and then whichever one that you install, the name that you create the first account. And the first account is going to be an administrator account. The profiles we talked about, you can modify them. You can make them mandatory. You can make them roaming, depending on what you want to do, where you want them to be stored, how big you want them to do. You can modify the default profile so that when you create the users, the initial profile that they get will be whatever you configure. And then we've got the public profile if you want to put it in with everybody. Domain-based, the real difference between work groups and domain-based is where the credentials are stored. Credentials for the domain are stored on a domain controller or someplace else. So questions? Didn't take long after we got back from the break, huh?